Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Untitled Reviews. This being a show it's about dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Ordinary Joe. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, let's start off with the cop reality, where Joe's obviously helping Eric as, he's putting in a new baby seat in their vehicle, and obviously Mal's kind of like, oh, maybe we should get like a bigger one or better one, and he's just, because he's very frugal, for the lack of a better term, with the money, so he's just kind of like, no, we'll make this work and stuff like that. And I even love him telling Joe, it's like, no, you need to catch up with me so that basically our kids will have a best friend and stuff like that, which is super adorable. Because I want us to kind of our kids to kind of grow up together and be there for each other type of thing, just like their friendship is. So Eric wants that between their kids as well. But obviously for Joe, he's spending, instead of hanging out with Eric and Frank for the game, it's going to be him hanging out with Ray, Jenny, and Lucas. And so he obviously wanted to find his dad's cap, because he wanted to give it to Lucas, because it's kind of like a lucky charm a little bit. But there's complications, because for one, obviously her friend, Gwen's friends kind of convinced her go on a date with James, because it's they kind of reconnected last episode, and it's no, kind of jump on that. But it's they mean that figuratively and literally, because it's figuratively, jump at the opportunity that's kind of presented, so you obviously like each other. And then one of her friends is no, literally jump on it, who cares, dating and have sex with him at least. It's geez. But even Joe was kind of oh, you're going on a date? It's you could tell it bothered him, and even more so when he later on calls to his mom. It's oh, it feels like you're erasing dad. And in that moment, later on, she has every right to kind of call him out, and even he recognizes how much of a douche she was being in that moment. And it's understandable. It's right. He's just scared for a moment, because it's always been there, so for him, it almost felt all of a sudden, it's almost like you're trying to erase dad because you're moving his stuff. Because our friends had suggested, not move it to the basement or anything like that, or get rid of it. We're just saying move it so it's not the first thing you see, because it's just a memorial of because it complicates things. Because anyone that comes in is just going to be oh, wow, it's just going to bring that up. It's going to constantly reopen that wound a little bit. I mean, that wound is always going to be there for them, But even Joe later on recognized, right. Because for Gwen, it's a situation of, basically, when Joe and Celeste's dad died, it's right, Celeste left, and then you went off to college, but the moment you came back, I wanted to kind of keep everything almost like a time capsule, and that's all it kind of has been. But it's I'm ready to kind of be able to move on. I will never stop loving your father. Your father, I will always love him and always be a part of me, but me doing this, she just wants to be able to open herself up to love again, And, Joe is I just want to make sure that you're okay with that, because, for one, I'm your mom. I don't need your permission. I don't know why, I shouldn't have to. But he was no, I'm sorry the way I reacted. And he understands, and she gives him the cap. And obviously, he was having a lot of fun with Lucas and, hanging out with him and stuff, watching the game. Obviously, I love Ray's trying to look at football and understand it more so and everything, which is kind of adorable, because he wants to feel like he more. I get it, because I'm not the sports dude myself, but I mean, maybe he is, but he's just not the football guy. But when it's all said and done, they had a lot of fun, and then Lucas was oh, maybe some things I have on my list I've never been able to do are go to a football game like that. He's oh, maybe we could. And Joe never laid anything out specific. He's oh, maybe we could do it sometime. And later on, when he shows up, Jenny and Ray aren't too happy about that, which I'll go ahead and say it, Joe overstepped boundaries in the musician reality a lot. I can recognize it. I don't think he did anything bad in because also I don't think they did a good job of setting up the ground rules there. It's a little more complicated in the situation of in the musician reality, but I get it's also it's because Joe's is kind of quickly because that's the thing too, it is a little to me, I think it is a little unfair that it's right, you're we're his parents, so it is that thing of Joe's trying to whereas in musician reality he's running away from his problems, which we'll get to in a bit, but in the cop reality, it's just like, oh no, like I just learned I had this son. Like he even talks to Amy about it. He was like, he had never really thought about. He's like, you know, what if he's like, it wasn't until he met. He was actually kind of nervous, but he's like, being around Chris, it made him Lucas. He's like, it made him think like, oh, what if I actually was like his father? Like, what if I played that role in his life? But Amy brings up like, right, I won't be able to have kids. She's like, I've had tests done about that and stuff, and she's like, I didn't tell you at the time because she's like, I didn't know how serious this was. And he's like, no, like we'll cross that bridge when we get there, but it's not a deal breaker or something like that. I mean, because especially considering like we know in the nursing reality, obviously Eric and Amy are adopting, but we also know how much of a like complicated spot that is for Joe, that he wants kids of his own. So like, who knows if him and Amy ever had that conversation about adoption? They tried time and time again in the musician reality, but so like we know that's probably a route but now having that conversation ahead of time, and because he probably thought about it some, but this kind of put it more at the forefront of his mind. But regardless, so that's going to be an interesting thing, you know, considering like obviously that being an issue, like it's a complicated thing between Amy and Joe in the musician reality, but how that gets tackled and handled in the police reality, considering like, well, their relationship status. I mean, obviously they've been together since graduation, essentially, in the musician reality, and obviously they've only just come back into each other's lives, you know, recently, especially with everything fast tracking the relationship to some extent, considering all the Bobby stuff. But aside from all of that, there is but circling back to it, like, I thought that was kind of like, because Ray's like, oh, this is what I figured as much as like, you agree? He's like, no, like, I just thought I could hang around him sometime. But like, Joe never made, because it's not like Joe like said like, oh, let's, like, he's not the one that suggested it. Lucas was, but it's like, right, you're the adult in the situation, you should have set out the boundaries. But it's almost like, to me personally, I'm like, you guys didn't do your job either. Because the reason why they're scared about this is because, like, right, Lucas is a pretty smart kid, because he'd even asked early on, like, oh, how do you know my mom again? Like, you went to school. Oh, cool. It's just interesting. Like, you have such cool friends that my mom's never mentioned before. And it's like, yeah, he's putting the pieces together himself. Because it's like, we're just friends, because they don't want to let him know, like, oh, we dated back in the day. Because if we did, then he might start putting pieces together, like, right, I'm this years old, you and my mom dated back then it kind of correlates there. Especially because, like, Ray is his biological dad. Like, that's all there is to it. Like, there's no, like, in this, because at least in the musician reality, like, Zeke knows he's adopted. Where in this one, it's like, no, like, he believes Jenny and he believes Ray to be his dad. So there's also that level of, I'm sure, Ray being like, no, I don't want you, like, coming to me and complicating my family life, Joe. But like for Joe, it's like, no, like it was like, oh, you brought him a family heirloom. He's like, no, it's just a hat. I thought it'd be nice of him. It's just like, Joe, you can't come over here whenever you want to, so we can't accept that. I just think they could have handled that. I mean, and they handled it. It's not like they screamed out and yelled at. It's just like, I feel like that, and you know, this is coming from someone who's not in that situation, who isn't a parent, who isn't, you know, in this awkward situation of having it. But also, it's like, you kind of open that door a little bit when it's like, because I think it's also messed up too. It's like, you would have, who knows when you would have actually ever told Joe if it, I mean, because the sad thing is of how that news gets dropped to him in every, like, in the realities of, in the police reality or even the musician reality, like how he finds out, it's kind of messed up. But even this is like, there's an extra layer of like, the only reason why you're telling him now is because of Zeke's current circumstances. Like, if not, you would have never told. She wanted to tell him, but was reluctant to. And so, I don't know. Because the thing is, the difference is, her and Ray in this reality are like on the same page, whereas her and her husband weren't on the same page in the musician reality, because she hid it from him about, well, because it's not like she wasn't raising Zeke in that reality. She was raising their children, and it was a secret that she kept from everyone. So it's not even like a 1-to-1 in that. It's just it's a complicated situation all around. But I just kind of felt bad for Joe in that moment. He's just kind of walking away. It's like, yeah, he didn't mean anything by it. It's just, he thought like, oh, this is my son. Like, I just want to get to know him. He's not asking, but I think it's that thing of like, they're feeling like, right, if the dominoes will start falling, like, yeah, you spend too much time with him. So once again, it's like, they are the parents, so they get to make those ground rules and stuff like that. But once again, it's like, it's not like he suggested it like the musician, like he did in musician reality. It was more like Zeke, and he was like, oh yeah, sure, sometime. He never was like, no, let's do this next week or something. It's like, no, he just said sometime. Like, he kept it super vague in the air. He never set anything in stone. I think it's just because of their circumstances and that it just complicates how they respond. I think their response was a little more complicated because of the circumstances in this, but nevertheless. Moving into the musician reality, like I was saying before, like Joe definitely overstepped his boundaries in many different regards. Obviously, he's inviting Zeke over to listen to him play, like, giving me ideas about the music and stuff like that. And obviously, like, he doesn't want to play the softer music because he was like, yeah, that's downer music. He says, no, I want uplifting music. I want like heavier, little, like, kind of like rock and roll. Like, he wants to go a little more energy, but it's because he's overcompensating for everything. And obviously, like, Frank and Eric are trying to be there for him because, like, Frank, because Amy wants to talk to Joe, but Joe's like, no, I don't want to. But Frank is like, your wife is here, like, actually talk to her. Like, obviously, he doesn't want to get in the middle of things, but also she is family, so he wants to, like, at the end of the day, he wants it all to work out. But Joe is like, no, like, he's in pain, which he has every right to be. But the thing is, and once again, I think the show has showcases that Joe has a tendency, rather than diving deep, like, rather than facing things head on, he has a tendency to kind of, like, bury himself in other stuff. Like, he tends to, like, not, like, that's something I think out of any of the realities, the nursing reality might be the only one he's really kind of come forward with that, rather than facing stuff, he's kind of, like, running away from it to some extent, which, and it's not just a Joe thing. We as humans have a hard time, like, sometimes we have a hard time facing those hard conversations, those, complicated. So, like, he's not trying to really have that conversation. Like, maybe before, if it was, like, if it was before the reveal about her being pregnant with Bobby's baby, then maybe they could have fixed it. But now it's like, he even talks about it with Eric. It's like, it's complicated. It's like, we've tried because it turns out they've been trying for, like, 3 years. And then, like, the first time her and Bobby have sex, they get pregnant. And, and now it's just, it's everything. I mean, hell, she's still also got to deal with, like, Regina running ads about, like, how much of a privileged life essentially she's living, because it's like, oh, look at these clothes that she wears, look at this, look at that, which I personally completely think is unfair. But it's also like, right, she's leaning into those attack ads because she wants to make Amy pay. It's like, right, you had an affair with my husband and stuff like that. But it's not like she was the first one, like, because we also know, based on the other realities, he had some skeletons in his closet, but she's just singling him out. I mean, maybe Amy was his first affair in this universe. Maybe that's why she's getting such a brunt of all of that in this particular reality. I mean, granted, she's kind of getting it from Regina. They don't dabble on it too much, but obviously she's kind of dealing with that in the police reality to some extent as well, but... And obviously Eric's in this position where, like, he wants to do what he can because he cares about both Amy and Joe. And it's like, right, if you guys want to work this out, you can work it out. But if you're also, like, saying you want to split, like, okay, that I'm going to be there for you. But it's like, right, you got to have these hard conversations. And yes, her mom's upset with Amy, but also it's like, you are my daughter-in-law. I love you. So, yes, like, you made a mistake and this is on you to kind of fix it. So you need to show up because Joe's doing the national anthem and he's bringing Zeke along. Once again, he made that, because the complicated thing is, once again, showcasing, like, yeah, he has the best of intention, like, oh, I want to spend time with Zeke, but it's also like, Zeke's a means to an end for you, because your life is spiraling a little bit, you've got a hole in your heart right now, and you're trying to fill that void to some extent, and him invites, like, oh, only if it's cool with your parents. Yes, but the problem is, you didn't have that conversation with them beforehand. It's like, oh, we're having this conversation, like, now. It's like, oh, we don't have much choice, because if we turn you down, we're going to look like the douchebag parents that won't let our son do anything. So they kind of go along with it. And even he's like, no, we'll invite you. You could get to the game yourself. So yeah, it's all fine and dandy. So you could tell their hesitancy, and I figured that was going to be an issue. But I'm like, oh, it turned out okay. I thought he was going to have a problem at the stadium, because he didn't really get into it much with Zeke, but he was like, yeah, like, I like the game just because my dad and everything. He's like, no, maybe you should go. And he's like, okay, only if you'll sing the national anthem with me. And they killed it, obviously. Amy shows up because Gwen invites her and tells her, like, go, because even later on telling Joe, it's like, no, talk to your wife. But all of a sudden, he's also making these quick decisions like, hey, Zeke, why don't you come on tour with me and stuff like that? It's like, yeah, cool. And then, we'll bring your family and everything. And even Amy's like, are you sure about that? And you see Joe, he's smiling and just moves on. He's not listening to her because, no, I'm not going to take your advice. I'm not going to listen to you. But then, Zeke's parents, his dad in particular, is like, no, like, what you're doing is jacked up because these are my kids. Like, I can't just, like, go on tour with you. And, like, even if we wanted to, we couldn't. It's not just Zeke. We have kids back at home. You don't know what it takes to take care of a kid in his condition and stuff like that. Like, we work tirelessly hard to take care of our family, and you get to come in and be this shining star. You get to be the rock star. You have that luxury because it's like you get to, because the thing is, it's that thing about, like, me, for example. I don't have kids. I'm an uncle, so I don't have to constantly deal with my nieces and nephews. Growing up, I had to certain times and still kind of do, but I'm not as involved in their lives in some regards like my sisters are, because that's their moms. So I have that in and out. Like, it's like, uncles and aunts talk about it. Like, oh, you get to enjoy the kids, the fun and all that, and then you get to bounce. You don't have to deal with all the terrible times you do sometimes, but, But that's the thing in this conversation is like you get to pop in and out whenever you want to. We're the ones, and we're the ones. I'm gonna have to be the one to talk with my wife, and we're gonna have to break our son's heart. So thanks. He's like, no, I'll talk to him. I'll let him down. Which Amy wants to check on. He's like, just no, leave me alone. Don't touch me. It's just like, but yeah, he's in the wrong here. But once again, he's hurt and he's spiraling a bit. And she's like, we can work on this and stuff, but he doesn't want to. And Eric tries to be the media. He's like, you know what? You've been riding my coattail for years, and now you're riding her coattails. And he's like, so mind your own business. Like, all right, cool. And it's like, that's not fair. And it's like, oh. He did, she's saying like, Eric's family, I'm family. He's like, oh, were you thinking about family when you're sleeping with Bobby? She's like, okay, screw this, and walks away. And it's just like, he knows he's being a complete and utter asshole. It's like, once again, because you're not talking. Because Amy didn't have to tell you. She could have kept this. Like, also, it's once again, it's like, it doesn't justify what Amy did. In no shape or form does it justify it, but she's trying to make it work. And if you don't want it to work, then make it a clean break. At least talk to her about what you want, and because you yourself don't know what you want. And to me, he ultimately has to like break Zeke's heart. He's like, oh, this is because of my parents. He's like, no. I'm making this decision. He's like, it was kind of crazy of me to do that. He's like, plus, with my life being as it is, I don't know. And Zeke now makes it almost feels like for Zeke, it's almost like, oh, like he's probably not going to believe that. He's still going to chalk it up to his parents, but also he's going to be like, oh, you're kind of a douche. Because also, like, Zeke likes spending time with him because, like, oh, cool, like, I have this rock star biological dad, but now it's also going to, like, dampen their relationship, I'm sure, because it's like, oh, you only, okay. Like, I was excited about it. Once again, like, he got caught up in the whirlwind of it all, finding out he has a son, like, doing all that he's done, like, that's also the problem, too. He almost makes it sound like, oh, he'll throw money at the situation, at the problem. And it's like there's layers to it. There's the emotional and complicated elements that he just wasn't considering because he's dealing with his own emotional turmoil right now. And then to me, he does essentially a super ashholeless thing of like, oh, he doesn't even call Amy. He has the audacity to text her, yeah, I'm going on tour without you. You want to do that, fine. But the thing is, at the end of the day, and even Eric was implying, like, you're not dealing with things. You're running away from them because because you have not sat and had an actual conversation with Amy since you found out about the affair. You've avoided her. You've talked to everyone about it except for Amy. When everyone, Frank, Eric, and your mom, the people, your biggest champions, the people that are in your corner telling you to talk to her. Whatever you decide to do, that's your decision. This is your marriage, but it's not like nothing's ever going to be what it needs to be. Nothing's ever going to be said what needs to be said if you don't talk to her. And that's the problem. Once again, I know it's not the easiest thing to have those complicated conversations. I have my defense mechanisms. Like, I have a hard time having those conversations about how I feel. I've had that problem in the past, and I still do. But that's also the part of, like, that's the only way, either way there's a relationship goes, the only way forward is to actually talk about it, But like I said, especially for Joe, that's such a hard situation to broach. Just talking in general, because he doesn't really like talking with stuff. He likes to bottle it up, and it just leaks out in the way that it did. And, this all plays into, like, obviously, it stems around the football game. So, because the episode's title is, like, Calling Audible. So, like, it's play on just obviously like the football game being the background antithesis thing across all the realities, but also like how he's kind of constantly calling an audible, in particular in the musician life as well as the cop life, but also in certain regards with the nursing reality as well. Which, really quickly, I want to circle back to the police reality because there's an element I forgot to talk about, and that is Eric and Frank. Because I guess Frank's out of the loop about everything. So Eric's like, oh no, he has other plans. It's like, yeah, well, if the Giants lose, it's going to be because of him. He already ruined. Why doesn't he ruin their year like he ruined mine? And Eric was like, shut up. You know, it's like, right, the Giants don't need anyone's help ruin their year, but also it's like what's ruining you is like, that's not on Joe. Basically, your choices are yours. If you get off the sauce, you could actually, like, you and Joe could probably be in a position where you get back together. And he's like, right, focus on your whole advice. I already had a dad. I don't need you to give me advice. Because he was trying to give Eric some advice. They had a moment because Mal kept, you know, she was, like, right about the stroller and everything. And he was just... But, you know, Frank had to be like, no, it's not about the money. She's worried about, you know, she's scared and nervous about bringing a baby into the world because the world is already complicated, but it gets even more complicated the moment you bring a baby into it and just like how that it shifts and adjusts your lives and how you're scared for them because you're bringing them into this crazy world. But like he is trying to talk to Frank, but obviously Frank's not in a right mindset. You know, he's drowning his sorrows, just kind of like Joe is in the musician reality, so... But moving on to the nursing reality, there is an expo that is happening, and they're putting on more of these pants as display. And Kinsley's boyfriend Xander shows up to actually help out because I love. She was initially saying like, "Oh, you need to like strut around the product, so Joe needs to put them on." And Xander and him put them on, and I thought that was kind of pretty dope. And it's like, oh, like, but sadly, no one still shows up. So it's like, no, let's do this instead. You know, it's like, oh, like, he was like, oh, to your dad, like, he's like, oh, I could, like, put on a show or something like that to attract people. And then, like, Chris is like, no, don't do that. But ultimately, you know, Xander had to leave, and he was like, oh, you know, going to, like, the football game and stuff like that. It was kind of a nice introduction to him and, you know, his interactions with Kinsley and Joe and Chris. Because he's like, yeah, like, she talks about you guys a lot, which I'm like, huh. That's why I'm also like, I don't know what to make of that. Because I'm like, but also it's like, right, this is her new job, and so she's kind of been all about this. At the same time, well, Jenny's still in the doghouse with her teacher, you know, so... Now when it came time to actually be in the room, Jenny was kind of put in like the kids' table while they actually went inside. It turns out a mom is basically going to jail because I guess she went about some very like not so legal means of getting her daughter in, which I'm also like, at first I was like, was that in response to certain things that have happened, not recently, but in the news? I was like, is there some correlation there? Because we never actually found out what she did that was such an issue, but now she's potentially going to jail because of it. Well, Jenny ends up talking to the daughter, and it turns out someone approached her without permission. It was an investigator. So, you know, talking to a minor without a parent's permission, because a parent needs to be there to, like, to legitimize it. Because if you don't, like, talking to a minor without their parent around, like, that should have been tossed out in court, but that was used. In fact, it's actually the backbone of their case against the mom. And Jenny brings this to her teacher, and it's like, yeah, like, it's all, like, everything's turning up, like, everything's coming out, Jenny in that terms, because it's like, right, she found the loophole in it, she found the investigator, knows exactly who it is, so this kind of puts some wind in their corner when it comes to this, especially because she had promised the little girl, like, right, I'm going to make sure your mom has the best defense, like, we're going to do everything we can to help your mom in this regard, so... I'm sure being her mom herself, like, that actually played a role in why she wanted to help that, like, seeing that little girl like that, like, why it probably hit even harder for her. But at the same time, Joe and, you know, like I said, the pants situation isn't selling too well until a little girl comes over and her and Chris kind of hit it off, and he's like, oh, like these pants, like there's this and that, and it's like, cool. And so she convinces her dad to like get one of every one of them. Even like Joe was like, wait, what? And it's like, yeah, the guy's a business owner, and he was like, right, like we've been looking into ventures and stuff like that. It's like, yeah, my daughter, she's the boss, so like if she has a pretty good eye for stuff, so it's like if she decides on something, I'm kind of going to co-sign it. So he's like, oh, we could basically take these specialized pants, we can take it on a bigger scale, like hit me up about it. Which I didn't know an expo like that. I wonder, is that in real life? I'm assuming like that isn't just for the show. That probably is a real expo in real life. And I was like, yeah, I think, because because I think we all have our own preconceived notions, unless you're in that world of knowing someone who has a situation, like a disability like that. Like, I think from the outside, you have your preconceived notions of things, and I think it is this thing of like, and I thought that was kind of a beautiful element just to bring into the episode of like, right, we could all do with a little bit more like, clearing away our ignorance about all of that, so I thought that was kind of a nice, that's why I feel like that probably is an actual expo. But Ginny and Joe are talking at the end. Obviously, it's been a good thing for both of them. But the thing is like, oh, we're going to have to reschedule our therapy session. He's like, no, I did. I was going to talk to you about the same thing. She's like, is it probably a bad thing that we're doing? He's like, no, we're busy. I'm busy. You're busy. There's kind of just no time. So it's like, yeah, I miss you too. But then when they hang up, they both feel, because the problem is like, this came at a pretty bad time. They were in a rocky place in their relationship. They were getting better, but now it's also like, right, we're going to be backpedaling a little bit, just a tiny bit, because like, right, because now we're going to make excuses not to go to therapy just because life is getting, that's the thing, like, they're also in that phase of their life where it's like, right, like work, Chris, like a lot of stuff is just naturally was going to be, dividing a lot of their attention, so they wouldn't always have 100% time for themselves, and now they're trying to make time for themselves on top of everything with their schedules getting fuller. And so, but that thing at the end was kind of like, you're like, oh, you see both of them being kind of regretting, because they're like, man, like, because you can almost tell they almost want to call each other back, like, no, maybe we should be setting some time. Are we really setting aside much time for ourselves in this moment? And I think that's going to complicate things on both fronts, because they're missing each other, and they're so busy that they're pulling away from each other in certain regards. So I think that might be a contributing element with certain storyline elements that I was kind of worried about, because it seemed like they're setting it up both with Ginny and Joe potentially, but we don't know how that's going to play out. You're kind of like, for the sake of the story, right, of course it's going to happen because it's drama feel like, it's just also the complications of life, and just like how people drift apart, and just what that means, and Joe drifting away from people. Once again, the nursing reality seems like it's a reality where, everything, it's like, no, like every life has it, like I've said time and time again in previous episodes, every life has its complications, so no life is better than any other life. It's just, your life is your life, And just the problem is, like, we can pitch, it's like, it's better in this world, but it's like, no, like, every choice you ever make, every life decision you make is going to come with its own complications and situations. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.